breaking news from RTV6.
I'm Mark Mullins in the RTV6 newsroom. Right now, Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard and Metro Police are announcing a new plan to help keep the crime rate down this summer in neighborhoods around the city. The mayor is laying out details of the plan at the Shepherd Community Center on East Washington Street. Let's listen in.
Plan was developed and will focus on community engagement, community partnerships, prevention, intervention, and then suppression. The goal is to reduce crime, the fear of crime, and improve the quality of life in our neighborhoods. You should all have a summary of the initiatives with you. Many of the initiatives are already underway and showing significant results. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Mayor Ballard.
Sir, thanks. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate everybody coming out today. I just found out that it's still tied at halftime, so appreciate everybody taking time to come out today. It's very important. People do consider neighborhood safety when choosing where to move, and we can never, ever, ever forget that. And a few of our Indianapolis neighborhoods have really big challenges ahead of them, and there are no easy answer. But the city and others are actively working to reverse those trends. And over the last few months, the city has developed a multifaceted plan. We have focused and strategic use of the police resources from IMPD along with many partner agencies. And as you know, we are starting to address many of the social elements that contribute to the criminal activity. Earlier this spring, we launched the Your Life Matters Task Force. We announced it earlier this month. That is meeting as we speak. We also, as you know, I met with a few gang leaders a while back to talk to them about what's in their head in what is a revolutionary movement across the country. Our charter school board just approved Francis Marion Academy. It'll be in the Juvenile Justice Center in the first year. This will give us positive intervention at an earlier stage. It will help keep kids going the right direction if at all possible. And as you know, a second location will be opened outside of the school either the next year or the year after. We did add 80 more police officers, sworn 60. We are adding 80 more police officers. We just sworn the majority of them just last month. We also moved 150 existing officers out of the office and back into taking active runs. As you know, we asked state lawmakers to increase sentencing for gun crimes. We do support minimum mandatory sentences for criminals who use a gun to commit a crime. We simply cannot allow people to continue to slip through the system only to release them back into the same lifestyle. We do a very poor job of that in this state. This is about priorities, and our worst offenders deserve tougher consequences than they're getting right now. This summer, IMPD will be ramping up their efforts in targeted Indianapolis neighborhoods. And the goal, obviously, is to stop the violence and stop the criminal life cycle that leads to that violence that turns entire neighborhoods into areas of despair. IMPD and many of our law enforcement partners will target these hotspots. We will use traffic officers and others to find people with outstanding warrants, illegally possess guns, and drugs. We will have a focus on intelligence and taking action based on that intelligence, and we will conduct sweeps like the action earlier this week that resulted in 60 arrests. We will continue to engage our community partners to help people make better decisions. A third of the city's homicides this year stem from fights or revenge. People must learn to resolve their differences without resorting to violence. But we also must ask the general public and the neighborhood groups for their help. People know what is happening in their neighborhoods. If you see strange activity or people milling about, tell us, call us. If you are a parent and need help with a child who may be heading down the wrong path, tell us. We can get you help. Reversing the current trend of violence will take everyone working together. It is not just about the police, and all of us want to solve this issue. It's my pleasure now to introduce the Public Safety Director, Troy Riggs.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for being here today. Let me kind of reset the stage and go over some things we've been talking about for quite some time, and specifically for the last year. Is when we look at crime and some of the things that leads to crime in our community and leads to homicide and devaluing human life, we have to look at a lot of the social issues. Chief Hyde is going to talk to you in a moment about a very detailed plan that deals with social issues and also traditional policing. You've seen some of the suites we've been doing recently in the men and women of the department. But it's more incumbent than ever that we continue to have dialogue and conversations about the issues facing the community and conversations that are followed up with action. That's why the mayor and I and the chief called for community conversations. Those are ongoing. We've spoken to people from throughout this community, from young people telling us that they have nothing to do during the summer that's constructive, that they have no one that mentors them, no one that cares for them, and even they say at times they cannot get a good meal. That should be troublesome to all of us. To those young single mothers that we spoke to, many that confided in Deputy Director Washington that they had a child after a violent encounter with a young man. But they chose to have that child. It's incumbent upon us to help them be successful, not just them, but the child that they're raising. We have a lot of issues, and for us to deal with that, and when I say us, I mean as a community of Indianapolis, we have to work together. Churches, political parties, labor organizations, all of us coming together to deal with some of these social issues. But let me give you some of the data that's troublesome for us right now. 90% of the suspects that your police department is arresting each and every year have a criminal history. 83% of the victims have a criminal history. Now, please don't misunderstand me. Every human life is valuable, and every human life should be treated as valuable. But these are the numbers that we have to deal with. That's why the mayor has been leading the charge at the State House for mandatory minimum sentencing. We believe that if we had mandatory minimum sentencing, our homicide rate would drop immediately overnight. But I'll also tell you that as we look at these numbers and we craft a plan to deal with it, much more needs to be done in our community. But it's going to take all of us working together. 90%, once again, 90% suspects in our homicides have criminal past. 83% of our victims have criminal past. Your police department, I submit, is doing a good job arresting people, only to have to rearrest them and continue to arrest them until someone tragically dies. We can do better. We're still calling upon citizens to continue the community conversation. I appreciate so much the many that have had this already. If you're interested in that and hosting one, dps@indy.gov, dps@indy.gov. You have my word that we will be there. We being the police department, Department of Public Safety. I believe I saw some representatives from the FOP here today, and I want to end with this point before the chief speaks. In approximately a year and a half, we've had 8 police officers shot, 1 fatally wounded. We also believe we've had 22 others shot at during that time. That's the level of violence that your police officers are encountering. That means Chief Hite's putting the men and women in blue in the right places at the right time. It also means that they're willing to step up and pay the ultimate sacrifice in protecting our city. We're asking for help from the legislature, and we're asking for help from the community, working together in partnership. I'm going to ask Chief Hite to come up, and once again, remember, the plan that he's unveiling today that has been ongoing and will continue throughout this year and early next year involves 2 components, a social component and also the traditional policing component. Chief?
Good afternoon. You know, strangers seeing me stand before you to talk about crime. Since 2010, I've been blessed to be a part of this team. I want to thank the mayor for trusting me to be not only Deputy Public Safety Director at one time, but now I'm Police Chief. And at that time, we talked about the trends that are coming across this country. And Indy was one of the places that was still the wholesome fabric of our society, and understanding that how important it was to maintain that. And we're still on that pathway. And I want to thank the mayor for making public safety still job one, and understanding that our community is made up of cities, and the cities made up of communities, and how important the communities are. I want to thank the director for also providing leadership, and Deputy Director Washington for providing resources and leadership in an effort to try to make sure our officers and our command staff have what we need. I have a great command staff behind me. We have great officers right there who are working as we speak to make our city that much safer. But while we're here for the 3rd time in the last 3 years, we've been talking about this summer initiatives. The first couple of times they were about initiatives, and we talked about people, places, and behaviors, and now we're talking about a different animal. In the sense that we now identified 1,300 people last year, 212 of some odd guns were taken off the street. But the mayor is right. We have to talk about what happened to those folk. But in part of our mission, we had to do some retooling and change with the emerging trends. For example, organizational transformation had to take place in our own agency with our own people, understanding that we could no longer hold information. We had to share it across many boards, including our federal and state partners. Institutional knowledge became the buzzword. We wanted to share that information because a lot of institutional knowledge was leaving the department. Community engagement became important. We recognized the importance of having community ahead of us, providing information, but also sustainability of long-term planning. But case management and disposition is what I want to talk to you about today. You heard the mayor allude to the cases of those violent offenders, what happens to them, what happens going forth, and when they come back to this community, what's expected of them. Data, technology, and you, the media, are part of the support mission. If you don't help us tell the story about what's happening out here in our communities, we cannot be successful. Looking at the crime data of 2013, we were recognizing that we were dealing with decades-old social issues. Unlike years past, when you talked about law enforcement from traditional sense, what criminals were determined to be criminals and made that their criminal enterprise, we're finding that social ills, as the director indicated, was driving the mission. We must work together, community, to make our safe neighborhoods work. We have safe neighborhoods. We'll continue to have safe neighborhoods with your help. The men and women of IMPD continue to work tirelessly to make sure that happens. But we also had to recognize what the director talked about was additionally true. We saw an increase in the number of homicides where there are multiple victims. In 2013, there were 4 of the 125 homicide incidents included multiple victims. In 2014, 8 of the criminal homicide included multiple victims, including 1 incident with 4 victims. And these were people who all knew each other. So these are not stranger crimes in many of these multiples we're finding, but it is interesting that the drug trade is behind a lot of it. Most of the gunshots most of the victims were killed by gunshots, and again, there were relationships among those who were shot and killed. We believe that robberies, as a result of that, are transition for those who choose to move out of the drug gang into robberies. We're looking at the process of identifying those targets and going after them as well. I think one of the things we want to highlight, first of all, is our recognition that the director talked about the officers being assaulted or shot at. We had 4 SWAT officers who were shot in 2014. Many of you stood out in the cold and you undersaw the pain and anguish. We thank you for being there and day in the warm sun. That we didn't take that lightly. And thankfully, our command staff and our members of our department circled their wagons and said, we have to have a full-time SWAT team. What we're announcing there, they've been in operation for several weeks now. And as a result, they have been responsible for a lot of the information that's being shared relative to our successes in reduction of violent crime this week. I want to thank the director and the mayor also for that opportunity to be able to look at those resources and be able to continue to pay for 60 officers. That's important to talk about. We couldn't have done that without them. The fact is we have 60 officers right now in the academy preparing to be great leaders in our department is very important. And so I want to thank them again for that. In the last 18 months, we talked about the 22 different assaults on our police officers, how important it is to move those directions, move in the direction we are moving in relative to our operations. We have a plan in which we talk about our community engagement. Our strategy is very simple. We're going to target those offenders, the violent offenders in those areas as data-driven by information received from not only last year, but current data analysis. Of the 1,300 arrests last year, 2,400 charges were filed, and again, 220 illegal guns were seized. This year, we're going to do something different in that we're tracking those weapons. We're tracking it even down to the ammunition where it's being purchased through our federal partnerships and our state partnerships. Our initiatives this summer include identifying through our Safe Area Enforcement Initiative. The goal is to identify individuals responsible for violent crimes and conduct covert and overt operations to disrupt those operations. This is involving the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the State's Attorney's Office, as we develop intelligence and additional resources. The plan is to use full-field investigative techniques to disrupt the operation, including search warrants and arrests by both IMPD and the FBI. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to have open places and safe places, open spaces and safe places for our communities, and this is an effort to do just that. And in doing that, we're disrupting the whole drug trade in our community and our violent crime. By debriefing, disrupting, and dismantling criminal operations, we'll move to a successful conclusion at the end of this process. We've had community impact meetings, as the director indicated, that talked about how the community conversations have gone, but the community impact meeting has given us information as to how people are really affected by homicides and some of the violence in our community. We're using that information along with that data to continue to move on in terms of our direction of our targeted enforcement. Our Indianapolis Parole Accountability Team, the IMPACT, is identifying those persons who are on parole, working with parole and probation and DOC. Within 3 weeks, we know those who've been involved in robbery will reoffend. We know those individuals who don't receive those services will again reoffend. So we're working with parole and probation and PACE and the Salvation Army and the Families and Research to try to identify those persons eligible for that process. Tactical area patrols. This is freeing up officers, again, by the help of the commanders, to proactively look at hotspot areas and look at those individuals who are actually engaged in criminal activity. This data team will be driven by officers who are focused on the mission of solving ongoing problems in the community and resulting in a reduction in crime. A data-driven approach to crime and crime stops. We are using our traffic units strategically in these areas we know for a fact are the thoroughfares where people transgress committing crime. They ride the streets just like you. We know that's where the guns are. We know that's where the drugs are. We know where the people who oftentimes use escape routes are, and we're going to use that information to further our investigations. The traffic branch is again in areas being deployed in addition to the downtown event coverage they do. They're going to be in areas to making sure that not only are we safe in terms of violent crime, but also safe as we drive as motorists. But they also identified those targets in those areas that we know for a fact are ongoing. Crime, the criminal tracking unit, something I really think is something unique to Indy in the sense that we've looked at those criminals of 1,300 from last year, those remaining ones, and basically, me up in mind, it's important to track them pretty much on a 24-hour basis so we know, have an idea where they're staying, the places they go, and quite frankly, what they're involved in. Part of that is also working closely with the strategic investigation officers to develop information regarding those criminals and provide appropriate information to our patrol officers and investigative units so that we know, in fact, what type of crimes they're involved in, a risk assessment of where they are, high, moderate, or low, and also being able to make sure that information is shared with the prosecutor's office. The crime of the CTU unit also is tied into covert operations. Covert operations really is our brain trust when we go after those violent offenders, tracking them again on warrants, making sure we identify them in the community in a faster way. Clean sweeps. You heard about that today. You heard about how we've had 60 people identified and arrested this last week. Many of them are part of an ongoing process of connecting them to criminal gangs and also long-term criminal involvement. This is an effort of all the agencies involved in this, from violent crimes to the aviation unit, sex offender unit, traffic unit, excise police, code enforcement, prosecutor's office, sheriff's department, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and a variety of others. This has been very successful in the sense that we've been able to identify, again, those persons who have warrants, open warrants in those communities, and be able to tie them to those criminal enterprises as we go about it. Our community outreach programs have been extremely effective. This year we've had a excellent camp, a gang-resistant education training camp. Our POW program football team has been one of the best in the nation, along with our boxing program. That program, I think both of those programs are the best gang prevention program we have in the country. I think there are about 300 kids involved in that. We're partnering with groups like Clean the Green with Reverend Jackson to talk about the 412 youth that will be out tomorrow morning at his church, like last week, and gainfully employed for 2 hours to help clean up the neighborhood. So there's several young men who have long criminal histories who are involved with this process, and this information has been helpful for them to turn their lives around and get out of the game. The Hawthorne Community Center, the Young Men Inc., Forest Manor Multipurpose Center, Boys and Girls Club in Indianapolis, Shepherd's Community Center right here. My good friend Jay Hyde has been doing outstanding work and helping us turn young people around and provide resources to these communities. There are a host of other things we want to talk about today. I think one of which is how we can begin to identify information that you need. As we go about the sweeps, so thank you for those who participated in it and heard the information and shared the information. But now we have to ask you to do us a favor. As we go about identifying these targets in neighborhoods, we're going to identify neighborhoods that are data-driven. You have to trust us when we tell you that we're going to move very quickly into those areas and really eradicate the problem. But we need to tell the story about those cases going forward. We've had many cases where young people who were arrested for handgun charges, have made up their business to be a habitual criminal carrying those handguns, have now moved into an area where they feel they can be the Teflon Don of the neighborhoods. They believe they're untouchable and that the courts can't touch them. Well, we're here to tell you, July 1, there's a new sentencing guideline that says that you will serve 75% of your time. And now's the time to get out of the game. We need you to help spread the word. We need to spread the word that being a criminal in Indianapolis is no longer acceptable. Whether it would be a traffic unit that stops you, a tactical unit with a guy who's a trained SWAT officer, or a police officer who's working in the district, such as the Great Southeast, commanded by Commander Conley, a great leader. We're going to find you. We're going to turn you around one way or the other. You can do it on your own, or you can do the time. 75% of your time means if you go in as a young man, you can be there for a very, very long time. And we're not trying to be draconian with this. We're just very clear about the fact that we have a lot of resources tied in this. You have all the breadth and width of city government here today. You heard the mayor talked about the multi-agency approach. You heard the director talked about the disdain we have for those individuals, the few that carry weapons and use it on a daily basis. You hear the effort of our command staff willing to relinquish officers to be part of a SWAT team full time. And we have you standing in the warm sun to remind us that we were all standing in the cold a few months ago, looking at the fact that we have police people who brazenly want to fire upon the police who are trying to do the right thing. A man who had $500,000 worth of stolen goods in his house, he had methamphetamine in his house, who was using acid, heroin, all at the same time. Is this the kind of society we want to live in, folks? I don't think so. And the good people in Indianapolis, through our community conversation, have sent a strong message. Yes, we will track you down. We will find you. But at the end of the day, we'll continue to make this the best city in America. Thank you very much.
People's prior violent histories and the fact that half the homicides are taking place indoors. How does this address that issue? Because obviously it's easy for a cop to catch somebody in a traffic stop or on the street, but these guys are doing this stuff behind closed doors all hours of the day. How do you approach that?
That's true, but if you hear what the chief said, more boots on the ground in the targeted areas. And when you're in a targeted area and you have more officers there and they get to know the individuals at a community, they develop intelligence. That helps. Tracking those individuals coming back from prison, those that they have deemed have the propensity to commit violence or be a victim of violence, and trying to find out where they are and where they're located. But the biggest thing that will help gain information for us is when people go to jail and they stay there for some time. Right now, in this city, over 60% of all shooting victims will not cooperate with the police because they either fear retribution or they want to commit retribution. We have to do a better job of that, and the way we do that is a total comprehensive plan in the communities, talking to people, having these community conversations. There is a mother out there, a father, an aunt or uncle that knows there's problems in the household. Call us to get the help that's out there from the 501c3 organizations, from government entities, before it's too late and ends in tragedy. There's plenty of time to prevent. It's hard to go back and pick up the pieces afterwards.
Given the numbers that we believe today, victims of homicides, the suspects, 60% of the people will not be operating. There's 30 officers shot at. The number going to here and one killed in fact in the U.S. So how do you measure the success of the 2012 and the 2013 against what you're doing today?
Well, we're going to have to sit down at the end, and we're reevaluating constantly. But what you're going to see is this will go on through the summer. It'll continue and probably be changed somewhat by the chief and his staff. They have all operational responsibilities. That'll be changed towards the end of the year. But you will see in September a mayor-led initiative that will start pulling together data, and we will have data at a level that we have never had in this community before. And we will not have anything to compare that to because it will be so in-depth, and we'll look at some of the root causes, not just crime, but social issues, code enforcement issues. That will be pulled together in September. Remember, this is not just a plan. This is not just a program. This is a philosophy moving forward. So when you look at what we've done in the past, this is going to be much more robust, much more targeted, and ultimately, we're going to have to see over the next year, 2 years, if we're seeing the changes in society, the social changes we need to really affect crime long term. I think they will. Not at first, though, I'll be honest. I think as you do your stories and we're having our community conversations and we're sharing information, we start making more data available online for them to search and do their own queries and look at data themselves. Over time, we start gaining information from people, and most importantly, we start gaining their respect more and more and their cooperation. That's the beginning of this today. That's what we've been doing over the year and a half. Chief, would you want to add to that?
I think really, I think the director's right. I think the whole idea is because you've asked for us a tactical plan, you heard more of a tactical plan. You heard the social pieces built into it. He's right. The one-on-one kind of conversation we have to have is because we're tailoring this to the community near you. This approach is not the cookie-cutter approach. If you've seen, we have realigned and transformed our districts to where the commanders are operating with their plan as to how it should be configured. No longer do you have shifts across the same board. Wherever they need to do to adjust resources and shift personnel, whether it be through a power shift or flex teams is a good example. They have to explain that in their task force meetings. They have to explain that in the community conversation, what policing looks like in the individual districts. So we're seeing a different approach. The director's again right. We're not using a cookie-cutter approach. This is not a start and stop process. This is an ongoing with case management and intelligence-led and data-led policing. But it also is legitimacy in policing. You're right for asking the right questions. We have to show we're legitimate in our efforts, but we also have to be progressive and predictive in terms of our analysis of what's happening when emerging trends are coming across the country. So when I talk to you about curfew, it's because I see some emerging trend coming about in our other cities that we don't want to have happen here. When you talk about the curfew sweep like we had the other night, where we identified young people who were able to talk to parents, we're able to talk to their parents about what's happening. That's what we want to show that's different. So it's not just data-driven. It is about hands-on policing and talking to families about emerging trends, but it's going to take you to help us explain what the nuts and bolts of this plan really is all about.
Chief, you have people in your high-crime zip codes that are afraid to come out, afraid to talk to the police. What do you say to them about this?
Well, I can tell you that the 275 are about to come out since we've done the impact stories and we've done the community conversations, have said to us, thank you for coming to us, because we are no longer afraid to come out and have a conversation about our communities. We feel comfortable enough to know that if we call you or we call through the TIPS hotline or contact you, things are starting to happen. So I think part of it is perception. And Director, we talked about this, we're attacking the crime, perception of crime, and quality of life. We have to convince people that this is our city and that we cannot let a few people take it over. And it's going to take your help.
Mr. Mayor, any reaction to the Democrats' proposal the other day about taking some of the money, not regulating citizens' gas?
We'll talk offline. Let's stay on topic. I'll get you offline.
All right, everybody will be there for one-on-ones. Thank you.